Have you ever thought about how one person, with just one idea, could literally change the entire world? Well, that's pretty much what happened 500 years ago. A German monk named Martin Luther set off a chain reaction, a revolution really, that would totally reshape religion, politics, and society as we know it. So let's get into how he pulled it off.
And this is the big question, right? This is what it all comes down to. We're going to see how a single piece of paper, basically a list of complaints, nailed to a church door, could spiral into a movement that would crack one of the most powerful institutions on the planet right in half.
Okay, so to really get the impact of the explosion, you have to understand the powder keg it was sitting on. And in the early 1500s, Europe was that powder keg. And it was pretty much dominated by one single incredibly powerful force, the Catholic Church.
You gotta understand, the church wasn't just about religion. Oh no, it was a superpower. It had huge political influence. It collected taxes from regular people, and it gathered just unbelievable amounts of wealth. And this meant that while most people were just trying to get by, a lot of the top church leaders were living in absolute luxury.
Now, in the beginning, the church's teaching on how to get to heaven was pretty straightforward. It was basically a three-step process. You confess your faith, you ask for forgiveness for your sins, and you do good works. Simple enough, right? But over the years, that third step, doing good works, it started to get, well, a little complicated.
And this is where something called indulgences comes into play. The church started selling these, kind of like a spiritual shortcut. The idea was you could pay money to get an official document that would forgive your sins or even reduce your time in purgatory. The bottom line is, getting into heaven wasn't just about faith anymore, it suddenly had a price tag. And for the church, this became a huge source of income.
And to make matters worse, the church basically had a monopoly on information. Think about it. The Bible, the church services, everything was in Latin, but the average person couldn't read or speak Latin. This meant they were totally dependent on what the priest told them. There was this huge gap between people and the actual sacred texts of their own religion. So, into this world of wealth, power, and confusion walks our guy, Martin Luther. Now, Luther wasn't your average person. He was a university professor and a monk. And critically, he could read the Bible in the original Latin. And the more he studied it for himself, the more he became convinced that the church had lost its way, that it wasn't even following its own rules anymore. So in 1517, Luther decides he just can't keep quiet. He writes up this list of 95 arguments or theses that call out the selling of indulgences and other things he saw as corrupt. And then, as the story goes, he walks up to the church in Wittenberg, Germany, and nails this list right to the front door for everyone to see.
This right here, this slide really gets to the heart of the entire conflict. On one side, you have the church, teaching that getting saved requires good works, and hey, buying an indulgence counts as a good work. But Luther comes along with this totally radical idea. He says, no way. Salvation can't be bought, it's a free gift from God, and you receive it through faith alone. That's it. Now, posting a notice on a church door was actually a pretty normal way for academics to start a debate. It wasn't really supposed to kick off a revolution. But thanks to a brand new technology, this one document was about to set the world on fire and get a furious reaction from the very top. And that reaction was fast and it was brutal. First, the Pope excommunicated Luther, basically kicked him out of the church for good and condemned his soul. Then, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was the most powerful political leader in Europe, declared Luther an outlaw. This meant anyone, anywhere, could capture or even chill him with zero consequences. But Luther had an ace up his sleeve, a secret weapon, the printing press. This was still pretty new technology, and it meant that his 95 theses and his other writings could be copied and spread all across Germany with incredible speed. It was an idea that simply couldn't be put back in the box. It went viral, 16th century style.
I mean, just look at how quickly things escalated. He posts the theses in 1517. Just 4 years later, in 1521, he's an excommunicated heretic. And then only a year after that, while he's literally hiding for his life, he does something absolutely game-changing. He translates the New Testament into German. So for the very first time, ordinary people could read the Bible for themselves.
So what started out as one monk's academic protest, well, it didn't stay that way for long. It exploded into a full-blown Reformation that would splinter Christianity and completely redraw the map of Europe. The people who agreed with Luther's ideas came to be known as Protestants because, well, they were protesting, and they started forming their own churches. But this wasn't just about religion.
It was a political earthquake. See, kings and princes all over Europe saw their chance. They could break away from the Pope's control, seize the Church's massive lands and wealth for themselves, and become way more powerful.
And Luther wasn't the only one for long. His incredible courage inspired a wave of other thinkers. Over in England, a man named William Tyndale translated the Bible into English, and he was actually executed for doing it. And in Switzerland, another reformer named John Calvin started taking these new ideas in a whole different direction.
Calvin's biggest idea was something called predestination. This is the belief that God has already chosen who is going to be saved and who isn't, before a person is even born. And nothing you do in your life can change that divine decision. It just goes to show you the Reformation wasn't one single movement, but a whole explosion of different ideas about faith.
So we end up right back where we started. The story of Martin Luther and the Reformation is this incredible example of how one voice, when it's amplified by new technology, can challenge the most powerful systems in the world. And it leaves us with a question that's just as important today as it was 500 years ago. What happens when a new idea simply can't be silenced?